Do not open that door. Darius Cole did not raise his voice. He did not step forward. He simply stood in the middle of his own garage, hands relaxed at his sides, while Officer Ethan Briggs stared at the steel door at the back of the building. The warning should have sounded simple. Instead, Briggs heard it as a challenge. Why? He asked. Darius looked at him with the calm expression of a man who had learned long ago that panic rarely improved a bad situation. Because you do not have permission to enter that room. Officer Mason Clark stood several feet behind Briggs, near a workbench covered with neatly arranged tools. The garage smelled faintly of motor oil, rubber, and fresh coffee from the break room. Outside, morning traffic moved along the suburban Atlanta street, while the open service bays filled with pale sunlight. Everything about the place looked ordinary. Clean concrete floors, 2 customer vehicles waiting for service, a faded American flag mounted beside the office door. Nothing suggested that the quiet black business owner standing in front of them had spent much of his adult life operating in places most people would never see. Darius Cole was not only the owner of Cole Performance Automotive. He was also a highly experienced Delta Force commander serving under a tightly controlled military assignment. But Briggs did not know that. To him, Darius was simply a man who had refused to answer questions the way Briggs wanted them answered. If there is nothing back there, Briggs said, then why are you making such a big deal about it? Darius held his gaze. Because privacy does not become suspicious just because someone in authority becomes curious. Clark glanced toward Briggs. Something about the answer made him uncomfortable, though he said nothing. Briggs stepped closer to the steel door and examined the electronic lock mounted beside it. This looks like a lot of security for an auto shop. It is a private storage area. Private for what? Business records and authorized equipment. Briggs turned. Authorized by who? Darius paused. People you do not need to contact unless you make this more complicated. Briggs gave a short laugh. You? Threatening me now? No. Darius looked toward the body camera on Briggs's uniform. I am giving you information before you make a decision. That was the difference Briggs did not understand. Darius was not trying to intimidate him. He was giving him an exit. Another one. The first had come when Darius produced the business license showing his name as the legal owner. The second came when Clark confirmed the address matched the registration. The third came when Darius explained that the anonymous complaint that brought them there did not authorize a search. Each time, Briggs had found a new reason to remain suspicious. Now he stood inches from a door Darius had specifically told him not to open. On the workbench nearby sat a dark secure phone, a worn military challenge coin, and a delivery manifest turned face down beneath a clipboard. Briggs had noticed all 3. To him, they looked like clues. To Darius, they were reminders that a scheduled military delivery was less than an hour away. He glanced at the clock above the service office. 9:14 a.m. Clark noticed. You expecting someone? Darius answered, yes. Briggs smiled. Who? Darius looked toward the steel door, then back at him. Someone who is going to ask why you were standing here. Briggs reached toward the electronic lock. Darius remained perfectly still. Officer Briggs, he said quietly, this is your last easy chance to walk away from that door. Briggs looked over his shoulder with a smirk. He believed the warning came from a nervous business owner protecting a secret. He had no idea the man speaking to him commanded soldiers trained to remain calm when everyone else lost control, and the real question was no longer whether Briggs would discover who Darius was. It was what would happen when the people arriving at the garage discovered what Briggs had chosen to do. 1 hour earlier, Darius Cole had unlocked the front doors of Cole Performance Automotive at 8:11 a.m., just as the first line of morning traffic began moving steadily along the road outside. The garage had been his civilian anchor for nearly 6 years, a place built from routine, precision, and the kind of quiet discipline he preferred. Customers knew him as Mr. Cole, the owner who remembered names, checked every invoice twice, and refused to let a young apprentice leave without understanding why a repair had been done, not just how. Most people in the neighborhood knew nothing about the other life he kept carefully separated from this one. They did not know about the secure calls that sometimes came before sunrise. They did not know why certain deliveries arrived with military paperwork or why Darius disappeared for days without explanation. To them, he was a successful black business owner who ran one of the cleanest shops in the area. That morning, he moved through the garage with a coffee in one hand and a clipboard in the other, checking the service schedule while two employees prepared the first vehicles of the day. At 8:36 a.m., his secure phone vibrated once on the workbench. Darius answered. Cole. A familiar voice came through. Colonel James Mercer. Delivery remains on schedule. Approximately 50 minutes. Darius looked toward the locked storage room at the back of the garage. Understood. Everything secure? Yes. The call ended. No unnecessary words. No explanation. Darius returned the phone to the bench and continued working. Less than 15 minutes later, a patrol car slowed outside. Then another. Officer Ethan Briggs stepped out first, followed by Officer Mason Clark. Darius noticed them immediately, but did not react. He finished signing a work order before walking toward the open service bay. Morning, Clark said. Briggs looked past Darius into the garage. We received a complaint about suspicious activity at this address. Darius raised an eyebrow. What kind of activity? Briggs glanced toward the vehicles inside. Someone reported people moving expensive cars in and out early this morning. Darius looked at the clock. We are an automotive business. Moving cars is usually part of the day. Clark almost smiled, but Briggs did not. Who owns this place? Darius answered without hesitation. I do. Briggs looked at him, then at the building, then back at him. You own it. The question was not dramatic. That was what made it noticeable. Darius had heard that tone before, the small pause between seeing a black man in work clothes and accepting that the building behind him might actually belong to him. Yes, Darius said. Cole Performance Automotive. My name is Darius Cole. Briggs stepped closer. Can you prove that? Darius did not argue. He went to the office, retrieved the business license and registration documents, and handed them over. Clark checked the address. It matches. Briggs studied the paperwork longer than necessary. Could still be something else going on. Darius looked directly at him. Based on what? Briggs did not answer. Instead, his eyes moved deeper into the garage, toward the steel door at the back wall. The first fact had been verified. The second would be too. But Darius could already see that Briggs was no longer trying to determine what was true. He was trying to find something that would justify what he had decided to suspect. Briggs handed the business documents back without apology. You have a lot of high-end vehicles coming through here, he said, looking past Darius toward the service base. That normal for you? Darius took the papers and folded them once. Yes. Customers bring vehicles here for repair, restoration, and performance work. Clark glanced at a silver truck raised on a lift, then at the appointment board near the office. Every vehicle listed had a customer name, service order, and scheduled pickup time. Nothing looked improvised. Briggs walked farther inside anyway. Mind if we take a look around? Darius answered immediately. You are standing inside the public work area. Beyond that, no. Briggs stopped. Why not? Because this is private property, and you have not given me a reason that justifies a search. Clark looked at Briggs. The ownership checks out. Briggs ignored him. You always this defensive with police? Darius kept his voice level. I am not being defensive. I am setting a boundary. The words seemed to irritate Briggs more than an argument would have. He looked toward the office, then toward the locked steel door at the back of the garage. What is behind there? A restricted storage area. Restricted from who? Anyone without authorization. Briggs smiled faintly. Including us. Including anyone without authorization. Clark shifted his stance. The distinction was clear, but Briggs treated it like resistance. You understand how that sounds, right? Darius looked at him. It sounds like I own a business with a private storage room. For a moment, the only sound came from an impact wrench in the far service bay. One of Darius's employees glanced over, sensed the tension, and quietly returned to work. Briggs noticed a dark secure phone resting near a clipboard on the workbench. Beside it lay an old military challenge coin, worn smooth around the edges. He picked up neither, but his eyes stayed on them. You military? He asked. Darius paused. I have served. What branch? United States Army. Clark looked at him with new interest. Briggs looked unimpressed. So now you are telling us you are Army? You asked. Active. Darius held his gaze. That is not relevant to the complaint you said brought you here. Briggs let out a short breath through his nose. Everything becomes irrelevant when you do not want to answer. Darius glanced toward both body cameras. Officer Briggs, what exactly are you investigating now? Briggs did not respond right away. The original complaint had been about expensive cars moving in and out of the property. The business license matched. The vehicle service records were visible. The owner had identified himself. Yet Briggs had shifted from one question to another as though each answer simply created a need for a new suspicion. Clark seemed to recognize it too. "Ethan," he said quietly, "we should confirm the complaint details before we keep going." Briggs turned. "I already know what the caller reported." "Then what are we looking for?" Clark asked. That question hung in the garage longer than either officer expected. Darius said nothing. He did not need to. Briggs looked toward the locked door again. "I want to see what is in there." Darius's expression became more serious. "No. You refusing?" "I am refusing consent to enter a private secured area." Briggs stepped toward the back of the garage. Darius remained where he was. He had spent years learning the difference between danger and noise, between a real threat and a person trying to manufacture authority through pressure. His heartbeat stayed steady. His voice did too. Clark followed Briggs halfway, then stopped. "We do not have a warrant." Briggs looked over his shoulder. "I'm not talking about tearing the place apart. I just want to see what he is hiding." Darius glanced at the clock above the office. 9:07 a.m. The scheduled military delivery was getting closer. What Briggs saw as a locked room was connected to something he did not understand, something legal, documented, and carefully controlled. Darius looked back at him. "You have already confirmed I own this business. You have confirmed the vehicles belong here. You have no evidence of a crime. If you keep moving forward anyway, then this is no longer about the complaint." Clark looked at Briggs. Briggs looked at the steel door. And for the first time that morning, the question inside the garage was not whether Darius could prove he belonged there. It was whether Briggs was willing to accept proof that contradicted the assumption he had walked in with. Briggs stopped several feet from the steel door, but the tension did not. Darius could see the exact moment the officer stopped treating the situation like a complaint call and started treating it like a contest. "You keep saying there is nothing wrong here," Briggs said. "But every time I ask a question, you put up another wall." Darius remained beside the workbench. "You asked who owns the business. I showed you. You asked about the vehicles. The records are right there. You asked about my military background. I answered what was relevant. The only wall in this building is the one you are trying to get behind, without a legal reason." Clark looked toward the open service bays. Customers had begun arriving. A middle-aged man stood near the front counter holding a set of keys, pretending to read a service brochure while clearly listening. One of Darius's younger employees, 19-year-old Jordan Wells, had stopped organizing tools and was watching from across the garage. Darius noticed him immediately. "Jordan," he said calmly, "finish the brake inspection on the Ford." The young man hesitated, then nodded and returned to work. Darius did not want his employees pulled into the confrontation. Briggs seemed irritated by how normal everything remained around him. No panic, no scrambling, no evidence of anything criminal. Just a functioning business and an owner refusing to surrender a private space because an officer demanded it. "I want access to that room," Briggs said. Darius answered. "Then return with lawful authority to access it." "You think saying legal words makes you untouchable?" "No." Darius looked directly at him. "I think following the law makes this simple." Clark stepped between the conversation before Briggs could respond. "Ethan, we need a supervisor." Briggs glanced at him. "For what?" "Because the complaint has been checked. The owner is verified. We do not have consent for the back room." Briggs shook his head. "Something is off." Clark lowered his voice. "That is not the same as probable cause." The phrase changed the atmosphere. Darius watched Briggs carefully. He had seen men respond to correction in two ways. Some stepped back and reassessed. Others treated correction as humiliation. Briggs chose the second. He reached for his radio. "Fine. I will get a supervisor." Darius nodded once. "Good." Briggs looked at him. "You really think that helps you?" "I think more eyes on the facts helps everyone." At 9:10 a.m., Briggs requested Sergeant Thomas Hale. Darius glanced at the clock again. The military delivery was now less than 20 minutes away. He could cancel it. One secure call would redirect the vehicle and remove the complication entirely. His hand moved slightly toward the phone on the workbench, then stopped. Canceling the delivery would protect the officers from a situation they had created, but it would also disrupt an authorized schedule for no legitimate reason. Darius decided against it. He had done nothing wrong. His business had done nothing wrong. He would not reorganize lawful activities simply because Briggs refused to accept verified facts. Clark noticed the secure phone again. Is that connected to whoever you are expecting? Darius answered, yes. Briggs looked over. Then call them. Tell them police are here. Darius's expression remained unchanged. They will know soon enough. Briggs gave a dry laugh. You keep talking like somebody important is coming. Darius looked toward the garage entrance, where sunlight stretched across the concrete in a long, bright rectangle. I am telling you that people are coming who have authorization connected to that room. Briggs folded his arms. And I am supposed to be impressed? No. Darius's voice was quiet. You were supposed to be accurate. 5 minutes later, a third patrol vehicle pulled into the lot. Sergeant Thomas Hale stepped out, adjusted his uniform, and walked toward the open service bay. Briggs immediately moved to meet him. Darius stayed where he was. Clark did too. Hale listened as Briggs described the situation, but Darius noticed something almost immediately. Briggs began with the locked room, not the verified business ownership. He mentioned Darius refusing access, not the lack of a warrant. He described the secure phone and military coin, but not the clean records. By the time Hale looked toward Darius, the facts had already been rearranged into a story. Darius recognized the danger, not because another officer had arrived, but because the next decision would determine whether the system corrected one man's assumption or officially adopted it. Sergeant Thomas Hale walked into the garage with the slow confidence of someone who expected the situation to simplify once he arrived. Briggs met him near the first service bay and began explaining everything in a low voice. Darius listened from several feet away. He heard words like restricted room, evasive answers, secure phone, military connection, and suspicious behavior. What he did not hear was just as important. Briggs did not mention that the business license had been verified. He did not mention that every visible vehicle had service records. He did not mention that Darius had answered questions without raising his voice. By the time Hale turned toward him, the story had already been tilted. You are Mr. Cole? Hale asked. Darius Cole. My officers say you are refusing access to part of the property. I am refusing consent to a search of a private secured room. Hale glanced toward the steel door. If there is nothing illegal in there, why not let them look? Darius studied him for a moment. Because rights do not disappear when someone becomes curious. Clark lowered his eyes. Briggs folded his arms. Hale's expression tightened slightly. Nobody said your rights disappear. Then there should be no disagreement. Hale looked toward the workbench and noticed the secure phone, the challenge coin, and the clipboard with the delivery manifest beneath it. What kind of business requires equipment like that? Darius answered. This business supports authorized work beyond routine automotive service. What kind of authorized work? Work I am not required to explain to you without a lawful reason. Briggs looked at Hale as if that answer proved his point. Darius saw it happen in real time. Each boundary became evidence. Each refusal to volunteer private information became another justification for suspicion. Hale walked toward the steel door and examined the electronic access panel. You understand why this raises questions. Questions are fine, Darius said. Questions do not create authority. Clark finally spoke. Sergeant, the original complaint was about expensive vehicles moving through the property. We confirmed the owner and the service records. Hale looked at him. And now we have a locked room and restricted equipment. Neither is illegal. The garage became quiet except for the soft ticking of cooling metal from a vehicle in the second bay. Hale looked back at Darius. I want everyone away from this area while we determine what is going on. Darius's voice remained steady. My employees can continue working in the public service bays. I said everyone away from the back. That is fine. They were already instructed not to enter. Hale seemed almost disappointed that Darius agreed so easily. Darius glanced at the wall clock. 9:18 a.m., 12 minutes until the scheduled delivery. His secure phone vibrated once on the bench. Everyone noticed. Darius looked at it, but did not pick it up. Briggs smiled faintly. That them? Yes. Maybe you should answer. Darius waited another second, then picked up the phone. Cole. Colonel Mercer spoke from the other end. We are 8 minutes out. Darius looked toward Briggs, then Hale. Understood. Any issues? Darius paused. Local law enforcement is on site. The line went silent for a beat. Is the room secure? Yes. Keep it that way. We will handle verification when we arrive. Darius ended the call and placed the phone back on the bench. Hale watched him. Who was that? Someone authorized to be here. Briggs gave a short laugh. You keep saying authorized like it means something. Darius looked directly at him. It will in 8 minutes. Hale's posture changed slightly. Not fear. Not yet. Awareness. Clark noticed it too. Darius had not threatened anyone. He had not raised his voice. He had simply allowed the clock to keep moving. Outside, the sound of traffic continued along the road. Inside, Briggs still believed the locked door was the center of the problem. Darius knew better. The real problem was that every fact available had told them to slow down, and they had chosen suspicion anyway. At 9:22 a.m., Hale instructed Briggs to document the scene and keep the rear area restricted until the arriving party could be identified. It was the first decision anyone had made that morning that sounded close to restraint. But it came late. Very late. Because less than 10 minutes from now, the men standing in Darius's garage would no longer be asking why a black business owner had a secured room. They would be explaining why they had ignored every reason to respect it. At 9:24 a.m., the garage had become unnaturally quiet. The employees kept working, but every sound seemed sharper now. A ratchet clicked against metal. An air compressor released a short hiss. Tires rolled across concrete. Darius stood near the workbench while Sergeant Hale reviewed the business documents again, this time more carefully than before. Briggs remained near the steel door, still convinced the room behind it had to explain everything. Clark looked less certain with every passing minute. You said this shop supports authorized work beyond normal automotive service, Hale said. Correct. What does that mean? Darius looked toward the secured room. It means some of the work performed here is connected to an approved military transition program. Briggs frowned. Military transition? Veterans returning to civilian life? Darius said. Technical training, transportation support, equipment maintenance, employment placement. Clark glanced around the garage differently now. The younger employees, the organized stations, the training board beside the office. What had looked ordinary moments earlier began to fit into a larger picture. Darius continued, this shop helps former service members build civilian skills. Some authorized equipment and documentation are temporarily stored here before transfer. Hale looked at the locked door. Classified. Not something I am discussing in detail with you. Briggs gave a short laugh. There it is again. Darius turned toward him. No. There is a difference between secrecy and responsibility. I am responsible for protecting material that does not belong to you, to me, or to anyone who happens to be curious. Hale studied him. If this is legitimate, why did you not explain all of this when we arrived? Because the original complaint was about cars moving through my business. I proved the business was mine. I showed that the vehicles belonged here. That should have been enough. Clark nodded slightly. Briggs noticed. You buying this now? Clark answered. I am looking at what we actually know. The sentence landed hard because that was exactly what Briggs had avoided doing all morning. Darius glanced at the clock. 9:26 a.m. For minutes, his secure phone vibrated again. This time he answered immediately. Cole. Colonel Mercer spoke with the same controlled tone. 2 minutes out. Darius looked through the open bay toward the street. Understood. Local situation stable. Darius glanced at Briggs, then Hale. Stable. Any unauthorized access? No. Keep it that way. The call ended. Briggs stepped closer to the workbench. You keep talking like that room is under federal protection. Darius said nothing. That silence irritated Briggs more than an argument would have. What exactly are you hiding back there? Darius met his eyes. Nothing illegal. Then why all this? Because lawful limits still matter when an officer dislikes the answer. Hale raised one hand. Enough. Nobody touches the door until the arriving party is verified. For the first time, Briggs looked openly frustrated with his own supervisor. Sergeant, we are standing in front of a secured room owned by a guy who will not fully identify what is inside. Hale answered, and we still do not have a warrant, probable cause, or evidence of a crime. Clark looked toward Darius. The situation had finally shifted. Not because Darius had revealed a rank. Not because he had threatened consequences. Because facts had slowly become impossible to ignore. At 9:28 a.m., the sound of several vehicles slowing outside reached the garage. Darius did not turn immediately. He already knew the timing. Briggs walked toward the open bay and looked out. 2 dark sport utility vehicles and a government-marked support truck were pulling into the lot with controlled precision. No sirens. No dramatic arrival. Just people who knew exactly where they were supposed to be. Hale straightened. Clark took one step toward the entrance. Briggs stopped moving. A man in a dark military uniform stepped from the first vehicle and looked directly toward the garage. Colonel James Mercer checked the building number, then walked inside. His eyes moved from Hale to Briggs, then to Darius. His posture changed almost imperceptibly. "Commander Cole," he said, "we are on site." The garage fell silent. Briggs looked at Darius, then at Mercer, then back at Darius again. For the first time that morning, suspicion disappeared from his face and was replaced by something far more uncomfortable. Recognition that he had never actually understood who he had been questioning. For several seconds, nobody inside the garage moved. Colonel James Mercer stood near the open service bay, his eyes fixed on Darius with the direct familiarity of someone who had worked beside him under pressure before. "Commander Cole," Mercer repeated, "the delivery team is ready when you are." Darius nodded once. "Give me a moment." Briggs stared at him. The title seemed to have stripped away every assumption he had carried into the building. "Commander," he asked. Mercer turned toward him. "Yes." Hale straightened slightly. Clark looked from Mercer to Darius, then toward the locked steel door. Pieces were falling into place faster now. The secure phone, the challenge coin, the restricted room, the scheduled delivery. None of them had been evidence of criminal activity. They had been evidence of a lawful responsibility Briggs had repeatedly chosen to interpret as suspicious. "What exactly is going on here?" Hale asked. Mercer answered without hostility. "Mr. Cole operates this business while also serving in a senior special operations capacity. This location supports an approved transition and logistics program connected to veterans and military personnel. My team is here for a scheduled transfer." Briggs looked toward Darius. "You are Delta Force?" Darius did not seem interested in the effect those words had on him. That was never the issue. Briggs gave a nervous laugh. "You could have told us." Darius held his gaze. "I told you I own the business. I showed you the paperwork. I explained that the vehicles belonged here. I told you the room was restricted and that authorized personnel were coming. You had enough information to make the right decision without knowing my rank." Clark lowered his eyes. Hale looked toward Briggs. "Did he provide the business documents when you arrived?" "Yes." "Were they valid?" Briggs hesitated. "Yes." Mercer said nothing. He did not need to. The silence made the answers sound heavier. Hale turned toward Clark. "Did you find anything connecting this business to a crime?" Clark answered carefully. "No, Sergeant." Briggs stepped in. "The complaint was suspicious. The locked room made it worse." Darius replied. "The locked room existed before you arrived. Your suspicion did not create authority over it." Mercer glanced at Darius, then toward the steel door. "Has anyone entered the secured area?" "No," Darius said. "Has anyone attempted access?" Darius looked at Briggs. They moved toward it more than once. "I denied consent." Sergeant Hale ultimately ordered everyone to wait. Mercer nodded. "Then the material remains secure." The simplicity of that answer changed the atmosphere again. There was no dramatic secret behind the door. No hidden danger waiting to explode into the story Briggs had imagined. There were controlled records, authorized equipment, and a documented transfer that would have happened quietly if nobody had interfered. At 9:32 a.m., 2 members of Mercer's team entered carrying sealed transport cases and a digital manifest. One stopped at the workbench and presented identification to Darius. Darius verified it, then entered a code into the door panel. Briggs watched closely as the steel door opened. Inside were organized shelves, locked cabinets, training materials, maintenance equipment, and sealed containers marked for authorized transfer. Nothing supported the suspicion that had driven the morning. Mercer looked at Hale. "Your officers are welcome to remain outside the restricted area while we complete the transfer." Hale nodded. "Understood." Briggs looked toward the room, then back at Darius. "So that is it." Darius closed the door again after the team entered. "That should have been it when you verified the first document." Clark looked at Briggs. This time, he did not look away. Hale slowly exhaled and reached toward his radio. "I want the body camera footage preserved from the moment we arrived." Briggs frowned. "For what?" Hale looked at him. "Because now we need to determine why a verified business owner had to prove himself over and over after the facts had already answered the complaint." The garage fell quiet again, but this silence felt different. The mystery was gone. What remained was the record of every choice made before the truth became impossible to ignore. At 9:38 a.m., Sergeant Hale stood beside the front counter with his radio lowered and both body camera files marked for preservation. The military transfer continued quietly in the secured area while the rest of the garage returned to something close to normal, but nobody involved believed the morning could simply be forgotten. Briggs remained near the service bay, watching the transport team move sealed cases through the rear corridor under Darius's supervision. Clark stood several feet away, reviewing his own memory of the encounter against what he knew the camera had recorded. Hale looked at both officers. "Start from the beginning," he said. Briggs frowned. "We already explained it." "Explain it again." This time, Hale asked questions in order. What exactly did the caller report? Had the caller identified a crime? Had anyone reported a stolen vehicle? Had Darius's ownership documents been verified? Were the customer vehicles connected to valid service orders? Did Darius ever attempt to interfere with the officers? Each answer narrowed the story. The anonymous caller had reported expensive cars arriving early. No theft had been reported. No vehicle had been listed as stolen. The business license was valid. The service records matched. Darius had never tried to stop them from speaking with employees or checking what was visible from the public work area. He had only refused access to the secured room. Hill looked at Briggs. "So after the original concern was resolved, what specific fact caused you to continue?" Briggs looked toward the steel door. "The room. The phone. The way he kept avoiding questions." Clark spoke quietly. He answered the questions that were relevant. Briggs turned toward him. "You are taking his side now." Clark's expression hardened. "I am taking the side of what happened." Darius heard the exchange, but did not interrupt. He stood beside Colonel Mercer as the final transport manifest was reviewed. Mercer glanced toward the officers. "Do you want me to contact our legal liaison?" Darius shook his head. "Not yet." "Why?" "Because I want their own department to see the record first." Mercer studied him for a moment, then nodded. Darius had no interest in using military authority as a shortcut to punishment. If Briggs had crossed a line, the evidence should prove it without rank deciding the outcome. At 9:44 a.m., Hale requested a watch commander and an internal affairs notification. Briggs immediately objected. "For a complaint call?" Hale looked at him. "For a complaint call that ended with us questioning a verified business owner after the original facts had already been resolved." Briggs lowered his voice. "You think this is because he is some commander?" Darius turned toward him. "That is exactly what you still do not understand." Briggs looked back. Darius continued. "My rank should not make this serious. It should have been serious when I was just the owner standing in front of you." The words left no room for argument. Clark looked toward the floor. Hale looked at the body camera indicator on Briggs's uniform. "We are going to let the footage answer the rest." At 9:51 a.m., the watch commander arrived and reviewed the first minutes of the recording on a tablet near the office. There was Darius presenting the business license. There was Clark confirming the address. There was Briggs questioning whether Darius could really own the garage. There was the request to look around after the original complaint had already been answered. There was Darius refusing consent calmly. There was Briggs shifting his attention toward the secured room. No single moment sounded dramatic by itself. Together, they created a pattern. The watch commander paused the video. "Why did the verified facts not reduce your suspicion?" Briggs said nothing. Darius watched him carefully. That was the question hidden beneath the entire morning. Not why Briggs had arrived. Not why he had asked questions. Why, once the answers came, had those answers never been enough? By 10:07 a.m., Briggs was removed from the scene pending administrative review. Clark was instructed to provide a complete independent statement. Hale remained because his own supervisory decisions would also be examined. The military transfer finished without further delay. Darius signed the final manifest and closed the secured door. Then he returned to the front counter, where the same customer from earlier was still waiting with his keys. "Sorry about the delay," Darius said. The man looked toward the departing patrol car, then back at him. "You do not need to apologize." Darius gave a small nod. Outside, traffic moved normally again. Inside, the garage returned to work. But Briggs's morning was no longer about a suspicious business. It was about a record showing how many times the truth had been placed in front of him before he finally had no choice but to see it. The investigation did not end when Briggs left the garage that morning. Over the next several weeks, Internal Affairs reviewed the body camera footage, the original complaint, dispatch records, supervisor notes, and the statements given by everyone who had been there. The findings were not built around one dramatic moment. They were built around repetition. Darius had verified ownership. The records matched. The vehicles were accounted for. No crime had been reported. No stolen property had been identified. Yet Briggs had continued to treat each answer as a reason to ask another suspicious question. Clark admitted that he recognized the problem before Sergeant Hale arrived, but hesitated because he did not want to challenge his partner publicly. Hale acknowledged that his first response had relied too heavily on Briggs's version of events instead of starting with the facts already available. Their consequences were different because their choices had been different. Clark received formal discipline and additional training after investigators determined that his failure was not creating the escalation, but failing to speak clearly enough when he knew the situation had gone off course. Hale was removed from supervisory duties for several months and required to complete leadership review before returning. Briggs faced the most serious findings. Investigators concluded that he had repeatedly ignored information that should have reduced his suspicion and had allowed assumptions about Darius to influence how he interpreted normal behavior. He was suspended, then removed from patrol, and eventually separated from the department after the disciplinary process was completed. Darius never attended the hearings to watch anyone fall. He submitted his statement, provided the requested records, and returned his attention to the garage. Months later, Cole Performance Automotive looked much the same as it had that morning. Cars came in. Cars went out. Young technicians learned how to diagnose problems properly instead of guessing. Veterans enrolled in the transition program, trained in the rear work area. The steel door still stood at the back of the building, but now everyone who worked there understood why Darius had protected it so carefully. One afternoon, Jordan Wells found him closing the shop after the last customer left. The young technician had been thinking about the incident for weeks. "Mr. Cole," he said, "why did you not just tell them what you really do?" Darius stopped beside the workbench. The worn challenge coin rested near his keys. "What do you think would have happened if I had?" Jordan shrugged. "They probably would have backed off." Darius nodded. "Exactly." Jordan looked confused. Darius continued. "And then the lesson would have been that I deserved respect because of my rank." He picked up the coin and turned it once between his fingers. "That is the wrong lesson." Jordan leaned against the counter. Darius looked toward the open garage door, where the late afternoon sun stretched across the parking lot. A business owner should not need a military record to be believed when he proves he owns his business. A citizen should not need a powerful title before his rights matter. If people only treat you fairly after they discover who you know, what you command, or what uniform you once wore, then they are not respecting the law. They are respecting status. Jordan was quiet. "So you wanted them to see that?" "I wanted the facts to be enough." Darius placed the coin in his pocket. The next morning, he opened the garage at the same time as always. No military convoy. No police cars. No crowd watching from the sidewalk. Just employees arriving for work and customers waiting for service. Darius preferred it that way. The most important thing revealed that day had never been that he commanded elite soldiers. It was that discipline meant knowing when not to use power simply because you had it. Briggs had believed authority gave him permission to keep pushing after the facts told him to stop. Darius had spent a lifetime learning the opposite. Real authority required restraint. Real strength required judgment. And real dignity did not need a uniform, a rank, or anyone else's permission to exist.